author Lewis Carroll. One lesser-known fact about him is that he came up with all these ideas for the book by his visual disturbances that he often experienced before he got a migraine. Many people experience migraine attacks, but don't know what it is, what causes them, or how to deal with them. He's just one of the few examples of many people that often experience them up to on a daily basis. I myself was diagnosed when I was only 8 years old, and when I became a later teen, was diagnosed with chronic migraines, which is pretty much as severe as it could get. So today I'm going to tell you the definition of what a migraine is as a neurological dysfunction, not just a headache, the stages and severity of a migraine, as well as the causes and possible remedies that you can use in migraine headaches. So the definitions are, basically it's an abnormal brain activity that sends different brain signals by dilating and constricting the blood vessels in your brain. And so that changes the blood flow and sends different chemicals to do different actions than they may do, or have them in different amounts that they normally would be. This changes the brainstem and also could affect the serotonin levels. Serotonin is a chemical in your brain that controls pain regulation. So oftentimes it goes on one specific part and only affects one side of your head. And there's a wide variety of different symptoms because it starts in your brain, and so it sends other chemical signals to nerve endings in your brain, which affect all different parts of your body. So the symptoms of them can include severe pain, nausea or vomiting, sensitivity to light, sound, smell, and even touch in some cases, vision loss and disturbances, so sometimes they're just seeing black spots or have what's called tunnel vision, so your eyes can only focus on one specific thing at a time, which makes it difficult to do things like read and write and look at a screen. And there's also things like lightheadedness and fatigue, being able to do just everyday physical activities. The stages and severities of migraines vary from person to person, but the stages, however, are pretty down to 4 main things. So the first one is the prodrome, and that exists before the migraine, and it can have several different symptoms, and they vary from person to person as well. So you could be moody, have cravings, be thirsty, changes in urination, and extreme yawning, even though you may not be tired. Then there's the aura. This can be experienced before the migraine attack, during the attack, or after the migraine attack, up to weeks after. It's not constricting the blood vessels like the attack itself, but it's often caused by the excitedness. So before the attack, when the blood vessels are either dilated or constricted, the nerve endings are already preparing for an attack. And so because of that, they get what's called overexcited, and then they start affecting other parts of your body as well. So there's physical and visual phenomena in this one, so not just like the tunnel vision and visual disturbances and vision loss like there would be in the prodrome, but there's also things like tingling. So you can feel pins and needles on one specific side of your body, get weak knees, and even be unable to walk in some cases. And there's also numbness and muscle spasms, as well as uncontrollable jerking, not quite like cramping, but it's like very pulsing. And you can also have difficulty speaking and having loss for words, basically. So your brain just doesn't come up with what you're trying to tell it to do. And so every brain process is just slowed down just enough to be like really annoying, basically. And then the attack itself can last from 4 to 72 hours. And these obviously are either very infrequent or very frequent depending on the person, and can vary in severity. So oftentimes these are hypersensitivity to light, smell, sound, touch, smells, and things like that. And it can do other things to your body, basically all those same symptoms, but magnified during the attack. So during the aura and the prodrome, it's all those same symptoms, but just worse, along with something like a throbbing pain on one specific side of your head. And then the prostrome, that is after the attack. And usually that's things like dizziness, confusion, exhaustion, and that can last just a few minutes after the attack, up to 2 weeks after the attack. And severity changes on that too. In terms of migraines as a whole, they can be something like chronic. They can be diagnosed as chronic, which means that you have 15 migraine days per month for 4 months or longer, and at least one debilitating migraine per month. which means that you can't participate in your typical activities. There's also what's called a status migrainous, which means that you get one very severe one, maybe just once or twice a year, up to once a month, I think. And those can last up to 4 days. There's also the persistent aura without infarction, and so that can almost leave you with stroke-like symptoms. You may not get the full attack of a migraine every time, but you get the symptoms for up to a month at a time. And then there's migrainous infarction, which is up to 1 hour of the symptoms, but it has more specific symptoms of like vision loss and hearing loss and things like that, and it indicates blood loss in your brain from the constriction or dilation of your blood vessels, and that one is more dangerous. Now, there are also many different causes for migraines. So the most common thing is genetics. So if your parents or grandparents have migraines, you're already at a predisposition to develop them later in life. And your sex, women are more likely to develop migraines around the stages of puberty, menstruation, obviously because there's a chemical imbalance, pregnancy, and menopause. There are also things like genetic disorders that make you predisposed just to other neurological dysfunctions as well. The environment also plays a pretty big role in things like weather. Whenever there's a change in barometric pressure or bright light, things like that can often trigger migraines in many people, which is very fun living in West Texas because the weather is very bipolar. There's also different types of triggers, and these obviously vary from person to person, but in terms of food and drink, things like alcohol and aspartame-containing things, so like artificial fruit flavors, this often cause migraines, and foods containing MSG and added hormones can cause migraines as well. And one of the most common things for college students specifically is a lack of or too much sleep. So if you get more than, I think, 10 hours per night, you're more likely to get a migraine because your brain isn't functioning properly, as well as if you get less than 5 hours of sleep, your brain also is not functioning properly and is more likely to develop a migraine. There's also remedies to all of these, and so there's causes, and it kind of seems like hopeless to those who have it, but remedies can be things like artificial, prescriptions, all the way to natural remedies and just taking vitamins. So there's always pain relievers like over-the-counter medicines like aspirin, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and also migraine-specific over-the-counter medicines such as like Bayer migraine and Excedrin migraine. That's a combination of acetaminophen, aspirin, and caffeine. And that just speeds up the pain relieving process by adding caffeine. There's also a prescription called tryptin, and there's many different prefixes depending on the specific purpose of that tryptin. And it dilates or constricts your blood vessels depending on what type of tryptin it is in order to regulate the amount of serotonin in your brain. And so it basically just blocks the pain regulating chemical to your brain so that you no longer feel that pain. But to take a tryptin, you must also take other prescriptions for the specific symptoms. There's also preventatives, and these can be things like cardiovascular medicines, anti-seizure medicines, antidepressants, anti-inflammatory, anti-nausea medicines, and those are taken on a regular basis. And for time, opioids were used also, but those are obviously highly addictive and typically are not used unless you can't take a tryptin or any other prescription medicine. And there's always alternative medicine, so more natural remedies, things like acupuncture and Botox. It's actually been really popular lately, this date piercing. I might get right here, I got it, and it's for migraines. And so there's a cluster of nerves in that specific part of your ear, and people with migraines would get acupuncture in that spot whenever they were experiencing an attack. And someone was like, why don't we just pierce it, because it's like constant acupuncture. So that's really popular now, as well as Botox getting injected into the forehead and the back of the neck. There's also this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy. And basically, you go to a therapist and you just train your brain to react to pain differently. So you may experience a migraine, but you can go about your daily life just as if you did not have one. And that takes up to years of training for things like that. And there's always herbs, vitamins, and minerals. Vitamin B2, also known as riboflavin, that's very popular but has side effects. And coenzyme CQ10 just to regulate hormones and things like that and avoid vitamins that have estrogen in them, which isn't as big of a problem for guys, I mean. And lifestyle management, I believe, is the biggest help in managing migraines because you can control the amount of sleep that you get, and you can exercise regularly and not take in foods that are just bad for your body. That way you don't have to overwork to compensate for what your body is already trying to fix in your brain. There's also a great amount of help in sticking to a set schedule, so that way your body isn't thrown out of whack every time you have to wake up a little bit earlier or eat a meal at a different time and things like that. And then learning to cope, that's probably the biggest thing. Recently, studies have been coming out where you can expose yourself to triggers and just try to develop a stamina for them and become tolerant of those triggers so that you no longer experience attack from that specific thing. So migraines affect lots of people, and you can't always control what they do. There's some that are less severe and some that are more severe, but we all have to live with the bodies that we've been given. So today I got to tell you about what migraines are as a neurological dysfunction and phenomenon, as well as what causes them, remedies, and the stages and severity of them. Medline Plus said that there is no specific cure for migraines. The goal is to treat your migraine symptoms right away. And there's obviously still research to be done, and there's not much. And there are research teams going out right now for headache and migraine specialists to do things more like CAT scans and MRIs as well as blood tests to figure out what exactly is causing migraines and why they're getting more severe than they used to be.